Hi everyone, I'm Meera Ghanshamdas and I'm the co-director of Roundtable Books, an inclusive bookshop based in Brixton.
And hello, I'm Sathnam Sanghera. I'm a journalist and an author of Empireland and a new book for children about the British Empire called Stolen History.
Sathnam, I've read quite a few of your books, and you've written a memoir, a novel, and an award-winning nonfiction. Why did you choose to write a children's book?
I think because I was so old when I found out about British Empire. I was in my 40s before I really understood very basic things about empire. Not least the simple fact that we are a multicultural nation because we had a multicultural empire. The reason you and I are talking today is because some white dudes invaded India in the 17th century, right?
Yes.
But it's really important that kids understand, that everyone understands it, because we've had so many scandals lately, not least the Windrush scandal. That scandal would not have happened if civil servants involved understood that the people on the Windrush came over as British citizens, And I think the sooner we teach that, but also other things about the fact that lots of our culture, our politics, our psychology, and wealth go back to empire too. I think it's the sooner you start, the better.
I agree, and I like the fact that this book is pitched at 9-year-olds, but actually I think it's pretty accessible for even younger. Talking about accessibility, I thought your approach to this was really fantastic. You made it very accessible to the experiences and the day-to-day objects that come into kids' lives. Everything from artifacts that are found in museums to HP sauce and the sports that we play, and how the empire played a part in that and how the colonies played a part in that. Can you elaborate on this approach?
Yeah, you've got to remember that the empire was the biggest empire in human history. It covered a quarter of the planet. And that is reflected in the fact that so many of our daily items that we use today originally came from empire. And think about tea, the great British cup of tea. Obviously, it came through the East India Company, and then we built plantations in India. Sugar, I mean, one of the kids' favorite things, obviously, comes from, the plantation industries that we started in the West Indies. But there's so many other things like the Scouts and the cricket and National Trust homes and statues. And I think this is a method that was used by the Victorians to teach empire, in that they looked at the daily objects that kids got in their lives and tried to convey how important empire was to them. But we can do the same.
What inspired the title Stolen History?
I think it refers to the fact that a lot of this history wasn't taught and it was kind of stolen from us. I mean, I wasn't taught barely anything at school about empire. And I think lots of people feel the same. But also, for me, it refers to the looting that occurred. That was a systematic part of empire. Our museums are a big part of our national identity. I mean, when people come to visit Britain, they often go to the museums first. And I think kids can handle the fact that some of that stuff was stolen. And actually, I think they're very keen to talk about it. If you walk around a modern museum now, I think you'll often find tourists and young people talking about how this stuff is not necessarily ours.
I believe that you've given a really three-dimensional, non-biased approach. Having come from a country and having had family that were really divided because of partition, but also I was born in Hong Kong, and actually my family left just before, when I was 16, just before 1997 because of the handover. I really know that this approach could have been a lot more radical, and a lot more judgmental. And I think that you've given an approach instead, which really gives that these are facts. And you talk about that a lot, that these are facts of what the empire did and its effects on the colony. And I think that's a really important approach. Can you talk about that further?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, something I didn't really understand until my 40s. I did GCSE history, but I still left the subject thinking basically that history was a list of undisputed facts, when actually history is argument based in facts. You can have different points of view. And I think that's really important to convey to children, because there's no getting over the fact that the British Empire and colonialism are deeply divisive subjects. And they're probably aware, kids are probably aware that adults have very strong views on both sides about empire. And I think the sooner you introduce that concept to kids, the better. I think too often kids leave education thinking that history is, something that is unchangeable. And this is an idea pushed by our politicians too, the idea you can't rewrite history. That's what historians do. They rewrite history. And this is part of the reason why suddenly we are having books about colonialism, empire for the mass public, that suddenly this history is becoming really interesting and really written about.
And I suppose it's not like as much as rewriting it is elaborating as well, and giving a more nuanced approach and a more complex approach.
And filling in the holes.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess another way the title refers to the fact that, a lot of this history was deliberately concealed. The British destroyed a lot of evidence. A lot of the imperialists involved in places like Nigeria, they destroyed the evidence as they went along. And even now, some of the evidence is not available. It's still hidden away. When you think about Lord Mountbatten's documents, we still don't know what those documents say. So yeah, it's about filling in holes as well.
You cover in great detail Britain's colonial past being quite uncomfortable for many people to talk about. And do you think that people are ready for this book, for a more nuanced approach and more and something that gives us a better understanding of history?
I totally think so. I think people in general are exhausted by the culture wars and division, and this is history that I think can unite us. It doesn't have to do. There's also really difficult things, not least the fact that British Empire was proudly racist for at least 100 years. There's also really positive things about it, not least the fact that it explains our multiculturalism, and I grew up with a narrative, and you probably did too, that brown people came here to Britain uninvited to take advantage of British hospitality. That's been the dominant political narrative of a lifetime. That's what led to the Windrush scandal. But actually, if you say actually brown people and black people were here for deep historical reasons, that changes that whole narrative, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you point out the millions who fought in both world wars, if you make brown people part of the national narrative when it comes to the Tudors, the fact was they were black people in Henry VIII's court. I think that completely changes the way we talk about immigration if you understand the history.
Who do you hope will read this book? Do you hope it's going to be used in school texts? Do you hope that adults will read it as well as children?
Actually, I've noticed that some adults are already quite keen on it. And I think in general, adults do pick up kids' books sometimes, because with a heavy subject like empire, it can be a bit foreboding. Every book on empire is about 400 pages long, at least, Yeah. And so I think some adults will be picking it up. I hope that some kids will read it and then start reading adult history books. I feel that history is kind of having a real moment with kids, and that it's suddenly being made accessible through horrible histories, through programming and through Instagram accounts, through films. And I think, hopefully it'll attract a broad range of readers.
The time period you cover is huge. How was it trying to put this amount of history into less than 200 pages?
I think the key was not to be comprehensive, because you can't, because empire went on for around 400 to 500 years, covered a quarter of the planet. I've been writing about empire for around 4 years now, and even I learn new things every day. So I went in thinking I'm not going to be able to give the whole story. I can explain basically what empire was, but actually I need to tell the story through everyday items. And I think if you're intimidated by the theme, that's what you should do with British Empire. Don't read a book covering the entire history. Pick a theme: food in the British Empire, or women in the British Empire. And I think that's it makes it much more accessible. It's too big a subject. And also people disagree too much. People disagree about when it started, when it ended. Some people argue it never even happened. So rather than go straight into that complication, it's best, I think, to start with daily objects.
I think no conversation at the moment about readdressing history or conversations about race in schools and with books cannot be had without a conversation about censorship. Do you think that it's possible that this book will be censored from libraries?
I do worry about this because there was a survey came out a few weeks ago which reported that people are going to libraries now and saying, why are you stocking that book? Also, in America, you've got books being banned in Florida and so on. And I feel like whatever happens with the culture wars over there eventually comes over here. Plus, the thing I was most anxious about was writing about the racism of the British Empire, because it's still denied. There's still people out there who claim British Empire wasn't racist. Every single imperial historian I've ever read acknowledges the racism of empire. Even the people who love the empire, like Niall Ferguson and Jan Morris, they acknowledge the racism of empire. But still, you have fringe figures now arguing that it wasn't racist. And my worry is that, parents of children get radicalized by this, and that suddenly their kids are reading a book which talks about the racism. But I realized that actually that you can't argue with the truth. You've just got to argue. You just got to kind of write the truth and hope that people accept it for what it is. But I know from experience, people get very upset with empire. So I wouldn't be surprised if a few people are angry.
I think is somewhat unavoidable as well. That we live in quite obviously, as everyone's aware, we live in a really polarized society, and people do take offense. And I do think that there's so much in this book that if you actually really read it, it's giving a very level approach, but there will be people who react to the negatives rather than see that it is a nuanced approach. And I really do have to stress that, having read it, I do think it is a very, very level, playful approach. Even it's humorous at points. You play with the reader. You make jokes along the way. It's great for kids to read.
Oh, thank you. I've got to say that one of the weirdest things with this book is that I went to the Jaipur Literature Festival and had a really great event because in India people know a lot about empire. And there was a journalist there who writes for the Telegraph and a few other papers, and she wrote a really skewed kind of account of what happened at the event, and she called this book vicious without having read it. I hadn't even finished writing it. And I think that is an insight into what we're facing out there. We've now got kind of fake history along with fake news. There's a view that, you don't need to listen to the experts. You don't need to listen to the imperial historians. Let's just pick some fringe figures who tell us what we think. Same happened with COVID, the US election, and the same's happening with history. So it's a very contentious area.
And that's why this book is so important. That's getting it into schools and getting it into kids' hands, where children can actually read for themselves that this is more complex than what they're being told. They become the information point. Hopefully, that's the hope. And as you said, because history has become like a lot more interesting, and kids are learning, they want to learn about their histories. That it is like, hopefully it'll be a real launching point for kids as well, to find out more about various pasts and learn about their own identities, but also learn about other identities and their own part in history as well. Are there going to be more? Because there were so many parts that I wanted to hear more about. And are there going to be more books?
Kids' books. There's definitely going to be more adult books. But yeah, you know what? I enjoyed it more than I expected. And turns out my puerile sense of humor, which often I think I get self-conscious about with my adult books, is quite suited to kids. So I suspect there will be, but I don't know what yet.
I would love to read something about partition and also about the Hong Kong handover, just putting it out there, especially because Hong Kong is so recent and still affects people, and definitely partition because it had so much of an effect on just the lives of people 3-4 generations ago.
It's a good idea. If I nick it, do I have to pay you a royalty?
Thank you so much for talking to me. The book is out on June the 9th. I can't wait to start recommending it to people. And thank you for talking to me.
Thank you, Meera. And thank you for the work you do. Selling books, man. It's important.